Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is July 17, 2020, and it's been a couple of weeks since I've uploaded something, but here you go. This is an audiobook recording of If America Should Go Communist by Leon Trotsky, August 1934. This file was originally transcribed for the Trotsky Internet Archive by Sally Ryan. It's originally published in Liberty, March 23, 1935, and reprinted in the Fourth International, Volume 12, Number 2, 1951, pages 54 to 57. And the copy that I'm reading here is from Marxist's Internet Archive. So this is the introduction from the Fourth International. The campaign against Marxist ideas, sponsored by the capitalist witch hunters today, aims to implant the false impression that communism is completely alien to American life and opposed to the welfare of the American people. In the 30s, during the rapid spread of anti-capitalist feelings following the Great Depression, there was considerable popular interest in the prospects of a communist America. On this account, the editors of Liberty magazine turned to Leon Trotsky for a bird's-eye view of what the communist future holds for the United States. Trotsky's contribution, addressed to a broad public infected with anti-communist prejudices and repelled by Stalinism, sought to show what far-reaching avenues of progress would be opened up by a victorious socialist revolution in the world's most advanced country. This article, published in the March 23, 1935 Liberty magazine, called forth much debate in the press at that time. Now the article, August 17, 1934. Should America go communist as a result of the difficulties and problems that your capitalist social order is unable to solve? It will discover that communism, far from being an intolerable bureaucratic tyranny and individual regimentation, will be the means of greater individual liberty and shared abundance. At present, most Americans regard communism solely in the light of the experience of the Soviet Union. They fear lest Sovietism in America would produce the same material result as it has brought for the culturally backward people of the Soviet Union. They fear lest communism should try to fit them to a bed of Procrustes, and they point to the bulwark of Anglo-Saxon conservatism as an insuperable obstacle even to possibly desirable reforms. They argue that Great Britain and Japan would undertake military intervention against the American Soviets. They shudder lest Americans be regimented in their habits of dress and diet, be compelled to subsist on famine rations, be forced to read stereotyped official propaganda in the newspapers, be coerced to serve as rubber stamps for decisions arrived at without their active participation, or be required to keep their thoughts to themselves and loudly praise their Soviet leaders in public through fear of imprisonment and exile. They fear monetary inflation, bureaucratic tyranny, and intolerable red tape in obtaining the necessities of life. They fear soulless standardization in the arts and sciences, as well as in the daily necessities of life. They fear that all political spontaneity and the presumed freedom of the press will be destroyed by the dictatorship of a monstrous bureaucracy. And they shudder at the thought of being forced into an uncomprehended glibness in Marxist dialectic and disciplined social philosophies. They fear, in a word, that Soviet America will become the counterpart of what they have been told Soviet Russia looks like. Actually, American Soviets will be as different from the Russian Soviets as the United States of President Roosevelt differs from the Russian Empire of Tsar Nicholas II. Yet communism can come in America only through revolution, just as independence and democracy came in America. The American temperament is energetic and violent, and it will insist on breaking a good many dishes and upsetting a good many apple carts before communism is firmly established. Americans are enthusiasts and sportsmen before they are specialists and statesmen, and it would be contrary to the American tradition to make a major change without choosing sides and cracking heads. However, the American Communist Revolution will be insignificant compared to the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, in terms of your national wealth and population, no matter how great its comparative cost. That is because civil war of a revolutionary nature isn't fought by the handful of men at the top, the 5 or 10% who own 9/10 of American wealth. This handful could recruit its counter-revolutionary armies only from among the lower middle classes. Even so, the revolution could easily attract them to its banner by showing that support of the Soviets alone offers them the prospect of salvation. Everybody below this group is already economically prepared for communism. The Depression has ravaged your working class and has dealt a crushing blow to the farmers, who already had been injured by the long agricultural decline of the post-war decade. There's no reason why these groups should counterpose determined resistance to the revolution. They have nothing to lose, providing, of course, that the revolutionary leaders adopt a far-sighted and moderate policy towards them. Who else will fight against communism? Your corporal's guard of billionaires and multimillionaires? Your Mellons, Morgans, Fords, and Rockefellers? They will cease struggling as soon as they fail to find other people to fight for them. The American Soviet government will take firm possession of the commanding heights of your business system, the banks, the key industries, and the transportation and communication systems. It will then give the farmers, the small tradespeople and businessmen, a good long time to think things over and see how well the nationalized section of industry is working. Here is where the American Soviets can produce real miracles. Technocracy can come true only under communism, when the dead hands of private property rights and private profits are lifted from your industrial system. The most daring proposals of the Hoover Commission on Standardization and Rationalization will seem childish compared to the new possibilities let loose by American communism. National industry will be organized along the line of the conveyor belt in your modern continuous production automotive factories. Scientific planning can be lifted out of the individual factory and applied to your entire economic system. The results will be stupendous. Costs of production will be cut to 20% or less of their present figure. This, in turn, would rapidly increase your farmers' purchasing power. To be sure, the American Soviets would establish their own gigantic farm enterprises as schools of voluntary collectivization. Your farmers could easily calculate whether it was to their individual advantage to remain as isolated links or to join the public chain. The same method would be used to draw small businesses and industries into the National Organization of Industry. By Soviet control of raw materials, credits, and quotas of orders, these secondary industries could be kept solvent until they were gradually and without compulsion sucked into the socialized business system. Without compulsion, the American Soviets would not need to resort to the drastic measures that circumstances have often imposed upon the Russians. In the United States, through the science of publicity and advertising, you have means for winning the support of your middle class that were beyond the reach of the Soviets of backward Russia, with its vast majority of pauperized and illiterate peasants. This, in addition to your technical equipment and your wealth, is the greatest asset of your coming communist revolution. Your revolution will be smoother in character than ours. You will not waste your energies and resources in costly social conflicts after the main issues have been decided, and you will move ahead so much more rapidly in consequence. Even the intensity and devotion of religious sentiment in America will not prove an obstacle to the revolution. If one assumes the perspective of Soviets in America, none of the psychological brakes will prove firm enough to retard the pressure of the social crisis. This has been demonstrated more than once in history. Besides, it should not be forgotten that the Gospels themselves contain some pretty explosive aphorisms. As to the comparatively few opponents of the Soviet Revolution, one can trust to American inventive genius. It may be well that you will take your unconvinced millionaires and send them to some picturesque island, rent-free for life, where they can do as they please. You can do this safely, for you will not need to fear foreign interventions. Japan, Great Britain, and the other capitalistic countries that intervened in Russia couldn't do anything but take American communism lying down. As a matter of fact, the victory of communism in America, the stronghold of capitalism, will cause communism to spread to other countries. Japan will probably have joined the communistic ranks even before the establishment of the American Soviets. The same is true of Great Britain. In any case, it would be a crazy idea to send His Britannic Majesty's fleet against Soviet America, even as a raid against the southern and more conservative half of your continent. It would be hopeless and would never get any farther than a second-rate military escapade. Within a few weeks or months of the establishment of the American Soviets, Pan-Americanism would be a political reality. The governments of Central and South America would be pulled into your federation like iron filings to a magnet. So would Canada. The popular movements in these countries would be so strong that they would force this great unifying process within a short period and at insignificant costs. I am ready to bet that the first anniversary of the American Soviets would find the Western Hemisphere transformed into the Soviet United States of North, Central, and South America, with its capital at Panama. Thus, for the first time, the Monroe Doctrine would have a complete and positive meaning in world affairs, although not the one foreseen by its author. In spite of some of the complaints of your arch-conservatives, Roosevelt is not preparing for a Soviet transformation of the United States. The NRA, National Recovery Act, aims not to destroy but to strengthen the foundations of American capitalism by overcoming your business difficulties. Not the Blue Eagle, but the difficulties that the Blue Eagle is powerless to overcome will bring about communism in America. The, quote, radical professors of your brain trust are not revolutionists. They are only frightened conservatives. Your president abhors systems and generalities, but a Soviet government is the greatest of all possible systems, a gigantic generality in action. The average man doesn't like systems or generalities either. It is the task of your communist statesmen to make the system deliver the concrete goods that the average man desires. His food, cigars, amusements, his freedom to choose his own neckties, his own house, and his own automobile. It will be easy to give him these comforts in Soviet America. Most Americans have been misled by the fact that in the USSR we had to build whole new basic industries from the ground up. Such a thing could not happen in America, where you are already compelled to cut down on your farm area and to reduce your industrial production. As a matter of fact, your tremendous technological equipment has been paralyzed by the crisis and already clamors to be put to use. You will be able to make a rapid step up of consumption by your people the starting point of your economic revival. You are prepared to do this, as is no other country. Nowhere else has the study of the internal market reached such intensity as in the United States. It has been done by your banks, trusts, individual businessmen, merchants, traveling salesmen, and farmers as part of their stock in trade. Your Soviet government will simply abolish all trade secrets, will combine all the findings of these researches for individual profit, and will transform them into a scientific system of economic planning. In this, your government will be helped by the existence of a large class of cultured and critical consumers. By combining the nationalized key industries, your private businesses, and democratic consumer cooperation, you will quickly develop a highly flexible system for serving the needs of your population. This system will be made to work not by bureaucracy and not by policemen, but by cold, hard cash. Your almighty dollar will play a principal part in making your new Soviet system work. It is a great mistake to try to mix a, quote, planned economy with a, quote, managed economy. Your money must act as regulator with which to measure the success or failure of your planning. Your, quote, radical professors are dead wrong in their devotion to, quote, managed money. It is an academic idea that could easily wreck your entire system of distribution and production. That is the great lesson to be derived from the Soviet Union, where bitter necessity has been converted into official virtue in the monetary realm. There, the lack of a stable gold ruble is one of the main causes of our many economic troubles and catastrophes. It is impossible to regulate wages, prices, and quality of goods without a firm monetary system. An unstable ruble in a Soviet system is like having variable molds in a conveyor belt factory. It won't work. Only when socialism succeeds in substituting administrative control for money will it be possible to abandon a stable gold currency. Then money will become ordinary paper clips, like trolley or theater tickets. As socialism advances, these slips will also disappear, and control over individual consumption, whether by money or administration, will no longer be necessary when there is more than enough of everything for everybody. Such a time has not yet come, though America will certainly reach it before any other country. Until then, the only way to reach such a state of development is to retain an effective regulator and measure for the working of your system. As a matter of fact, during the first few years, a planned economy needs sound money even more than did old-fashioned capitalism. The professor who regulates the monetary unit with the aim of regulating the whole business system is like the man who tried to lift both his feet off the ground at the same time. Soviet America will possess supplies of gold big enough to stabilize the dollar, a priceless asset. In Russia, we have been expanding our industrial plant by 20 and 30% a year, but owing to a weak ruble, we have not been able to distribute this increase effectively. This is partly because we have allowed our bureaucracy to subject our monetary system to administrative one-sidedness. You will be spared this evil. As a result, you will greatly surpass us in both increased production and distribution, leading to a rapid advance in the comfort and welfare of your population. In all this, you will not need to imitate our standardized production for our pitiable mass consumers. We have taken over from Tsarist Russia a pauper's heritage, a culturally undeveloped peasantry with a low standard of living. We had to build our factories and dams at the expense of the consumers. We have had continual monetary inflation and a monstrous bureaucracy. Soviet America will not have to imitate our bureaucratic methods. Among us, the lack of the bare necessities has caused an intense scramble for an extra loaf of bread, an extra yard of cloth by everyone. In this struggle, our bureaucracy steps forward as a conciliator, as an all-powerful court of arbitration. You, on the other hand, are much wealthier and would have little difficulty in supplying all of your people with all of the necessities of life. Moreover, your needs, tastes, and habits would never permit your bureaucracy to divide the national income. Instead, when you organize your society to produce for human needs rather than private profits, your entire population will group itself around new trends and groups, which will struggle with one another and prevent an overweening bureaucracy from imposing itself upon them. You can thus avoid growth of bureaucratism by the practice of Soviets, that is to say, democracy, the most flexible form of government yet developed. Soviet organization cannot achieve miracles, but must simply reflect the will of the people. With us, the Soviets have been bureaucratized as a result of the political monopoly of a single party, which has itself become a bureaucracy. This situation resulted from the exceptional difficulties of socialist pioneering in a poor and backward country. The American Soviets will be full-blooded and vigorous, without need or opportunity for such measures as circumstances imposed upon Russia. Your unregenerate capitalists will, of course, find no place for themselves in the new setup. It is hard to imagine, say, Henry Ford as the head of the Detroit Soviet. Yet a wide struggle between interests, groups, and ideas is not only conceivable, it is inevitable. 1-year, 5-year, 10-year plans of business development, schemes for national education, construction of new basic lines of transportation, the transportation of the farms, the program for improving the technological and cultural equipment of Latin America, a program for stratosphere communication, eugenics. All of these will arouse controversy, vigorous electoral struggle, and passionate debate in the newspapers and at public meetings. For Soviet America will not imitate the monopoly of the press by the heads of Soviet Russia's bureaucracy. While Soviet America would nationalize all printing plants, paper mills, and means of distribution, this would be a purely negative measure. It would simply mean that private capital will no longer be allowed to decide what publications should be published, whether they should be progressive or reactionary, wet or dry, puritanical or pornographic. Soviet America will have to find a new solution for the question of how the power of the press is to function in a socialist regime. It might be done on the basis of proportional representation for the votes in each Soviet election. Thus, the right of each group of citizens to use the power of the press would depend on their numerical strength, the same principle being applied to the use of meeting halls, allotment of time on the air, and so forth. Thus, the management and policy of publications would be decided not by individual checkbooks, but by group ideas. This may take little account of numerically small but important groups, but it simply means that each new idea will be compelled, as throughout history, to prove its right to existence. Rich Soviet America can set aside vast funds for research and invention, discoveries and experiments in every field. You won't neglect your bold architects and sculptors, your unconventional poets and audacious philosophers. In fact, the Soviet Yankees of the future will give a lead to Europe in those very fields where Europe has hitherto been your master. Europeans have little conception of the power of technology to influence human destiny, and have adopted an attitude of sneering superiority toward Americanism, particularly since the crisis. Yet Americanism marks the true dividing line between the Middle Ages and the modern world. Hitherto, America's conquest of nature has been so violent and passionate that you have had no time to modernize your philosophies or to develop your own artistic forms. Hence, you have been hostile to the doctrines of Hegel, Marx, and Darwin. The burning of Darwin's works by the Baptists of Tennessee is only a clumsy reflection of the American dislike for the doctrines of evolution. This attitude is not confined to your pulpits. It is still part of your general mental makeup. Your atheists as well as your Quakers are determined rationalists, and your rationalism itself is weakened by empiricism and moralism. It has none of the merciless vitality of the great European rationalists, so your philosophic method is even more antiquated than your economic system and your political institutions. Today, quite unprepared, you're being forced to face those social contradictions that grow up unsuspected in every society. You have conquered nature by means of the tools that your inventive genius has created, only to find that your tools have all but destroyed you. Contrary to all your hopes and desires, your unheard of wealth has produced unheard of misfortunes. You have discovered that social development does not follow a simple formula. Hence, you have been thrust into the school of the dialectic to stay. There is no turning back from it to the mode of thinking and acting prevalent in the 17th and 18th centuries. While the romantic numbskulls of Nazi Germany are dreaming of restoring the old race of Europe's dark forest to its original purity, or rather, its original filth, you Americans, taking a firm grip on your economic machinery and your culture, will apply genuine scientific methods to the problem of eugenics. Within a century, out of your melting pot of races, there will come a new breed of men, the first worthy of the name of man. One final prophecy. In the third year of the Soviet rule in America, you will no longer chew gum. End of document. So, what did you think? Leave some comments below. I must confess, I have absolutely no idea what "you will no longer chew gum" is a reference to. This reminds me a little bit of the Kyle Kalinske inside joke about Big Seltzer. I don't know if Trotsky was a gum chewer or anti-gum. But anyway, for a little bit of background on this, of course, we know from Marx that Marx's prediction was basically that the more advanced capitalist countries would head into socialism first because it would be in those countries, Germany, the United States, France, etc., that capitalism would evolve itself to a point where the contradictions would become so glaring, tense, that it would yield to revolution eventually. Of course, Trotsky was part of the Russian revolution that led to the founding of the USSR. And that, in a way, went counter to the theory because I would argue Russia was maybe a more conquerable country by communist revolutionaries because it was so, less urban. It was a vast, vast rural space, very undeveloped, and maybe harder to defend by capitalists. And they certainly tried to take it back. But, so although that revolution happened in some sense out of sequence, leading to the necessity of the development of the theory of state monopoly capitalism to bring the somewhat, backward Russian and other Soviet economy up to a level where socialism and the abundance of industrial production would be possible. Trotsky was still very interested, some would say obsessed, some would say, inordinately interested in fomenting revolution in the UK, in Germany, in the United States. And, I think that that's where this document came from. It makes sense, being a Marxist, thinking that, when's America going to go communist? And there are a lot of interesting ideas in this document. I think some of these, it seems in a way like United States capitalists did employ at least half measures of some of these. Of course, he references FDR and some of the New Deal half-assed attempts at standardization and rational planning and that kind of thing. Please excuse my voice, by the way. I was just I was using my voice a lot earlier, and it's a little worn out. But it seems like a lot of these systems, or some of them anyway, a good number of them, have been implemented, but for profit, which, now there is so much abundance in the United States, at least of cheap consumer goods. Not still housing, education, medical care, sort of the core necessities. But I don't know, at some point the system has to fall. Of course, Trotsky here was writing in the 1930s. This was before World War II, of course, came to a head. which changed the game somewhat, dramatically, I would say. Excuse me. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. Like I said, leave your thoughts in the comments. One more thing I actually want to add before signing off is there is, some of you may know this, some of you may not. There are some like paleo-conservative, like Ron Paul type criticisms of American, you may have heard this before, crony capitalism or corporate capitalism. Okay, it's just capitalism, but they will criticize that system for not just being total freewheeling competition, but actually implementing some of these, gigantic corporate farms and stuff like that as being communistic. And I think, again, it's there's this strange thing in America of capitalists co-opting out of fear of the competition, the ideological competition, and indeed the industrial productive competition of Soviet Union, the Soviet, I don't know why I said that, the Soviet Union in the 20th century did scare them. The Soviet Union was able to industrialize rapidly and provide a much better standard of living. They, of course, wanted to glean what principles they could from that, of course, while keeping capitalism, private profits, and private ownership and control of industry intact. All right, I'm officially going to leave it there. Of course, that's not communistic, but what do Ron Paul people know anyway? So this has been Socialism for All, found online at facebook.com/socialism for all, also youtube.com/c/socialism for all. Thanks for listening.